guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley, and if you're new here, I like to talk about crime, creepy, and unbelievable stories. Now, today's video, we're going to turn our attention back to true crime. I haven't done a true crime video in a minute, so I really want to turn our attention back to that just for at least today's video. Now, fair warning, this is a fairly long video, probably one of the longest ones I've done in a while, so take a second, grab a coffee, maybe even a snack, and get ready. But before we get into the story, of course, if you guys enjoy my content, I would really appreciate if you guys would comment, like, subscribe, or even just share this video. It really does help me grow on here and get my videos out to new audiences. I am seeing a lot of new subscribers on here from my TikTok, which I am extremely thankful for. So if you guys wouldn't mind doing me that small favor, I would be eternally thankful. All right, enough rambling. Let's get into the video. With the Idaho 4 really captivating everyone's hearts in the past few months and everyone's attention, there have been dozens of speculative theories on why this happened. However, because there has already been so many people talking about the unfortunate events that occurred on November 13th, I don't really see the point in making another video that's just going to regurgitate the same information that's already been presented really well by a bunch of other YouTubers out there that you guys can go watch. All of the relevant information has really been presented at this point without going into more speculative theories that could hurt people, innocent people out there. So I don't really want to go in that direction. And besides, there's been a gag order in place that prevents basically everyone involved from talking about the case to the media. So unless there is a leak somewhere or a very big development, we're probably not going to hear any more information. So with that in mind, I kind of just want to turn our attention to why this could have potentially happened and a separate case that is being tied to the reasoning behind Kohberger's alleged crime. And if you already clicked on this video, then you know that we're going to talk about the incel theory. And almost from the beginning, since Kohberger was arrested, even before that, many have speculated that this entire situation was the work of an incel. Once Kohberger was arrested and new connections were being made, people were connecting the dots everywhere, questions began stemming from a very mysterious Facebook account known as Pappa Rodger. So first though, if you are confused, let's clear up a few things because I don't know if everyone's been following this case. So probably you might be confused about who Pappa Rodger is. So Pappa Rodger was an anonymous Facebook account that was created to comment in the Facebook group for the Idaho 4 case. Now, the purpose of this group was created for the community and friends and family to kind of discuss the case, discuss any tips, theories about the case, and Pappa Rodger was one of these Facebook accounts that subscribed or joined this Facebook group. As time went on after the murders, the Pappa Rodger account started commenting some very strange things, and people began to notice. They were getting quite suspicious about the things he was saying. Particularly, he seemed to know a lot about the crime scene, and people were left wondering how he could have potentially known so much specific information unless he was just purposely trolling everyone. However, there was one particular comment that caught my attention and also caught a lot of other people's attention, and that was specifically about the sheath being left behind at the crime scene. How could an anonymous sleuth know exactly that one particular piece of evidence was left behind at the crime scene? And at this point, when that comment was made, all we really knew about the case was that the weapon during these attacks was some sort of fixed knife. There was not a whole lot of detail released to everyone yet. So we fast forward to the arrest, and of course, wouldn't you have it, the day after Kohberger is arrested, the Pappa Rodger account was either deleted or deactivated, with many people speculating that this was done by law enforcement. So of course, as you can imagine, this drove everyone bananas. People were speculating that this could have very likely been Brian all along in this Facebook group, taunting and subtly bragging to know so much about this case because could he have potentially been the one to do this? We still don't know 100% sure if he was the person responsible for the Pappa Rodger account or even for the murders because, innocent until proven guilty. But it's not just because of the comments he was leaving on this Facebook group, but also because of the photo that was chosen as the profile photo. And if you take a look at this photo here, the consensus seems to be that this is some sort of AI rendering that coincidentally resembles Brian quite a lot. Let me know what you guys think. But I'm sure you're all asking, well, how does this tie back to the incel theory? Well, if you've been following this case, then you know that Kaylee was likely the intended target behind all of this because her wounds were confirmed to be significantly worse than everyone else's. She was also known to have a stalker in the weeks and possibly even in the months leading up to November 13th, with their identity not being fully identified yet, but you can kind of see at this point where all the fingers are being pointed towards. And just last week, it was confirmed that Brian had sent Kaylee 3 Instagram messages via Instagram DM that went unanswered. So my question here is whether or not this is possibly the motive for these senseless attacks and whether or not it was out of revenge for unrequited love. Well, possibly, right? We don't know all of the answers just yet, but the way all of this ties together is specifically by the chosen name of Pappa Rodger. This was done with purpose if we're all right about this theory. Coincidentally, Rodger is the same last name of a very well-known perpetrator who was dubbed as the Incel hero known as Elliot Rodger, who amassed a large following of like-minded and dangerous thinkers. And for this video, I took the time to read over his 141-page manifesto so we could get as much relevant information as possible so we can get an inside perspective as to what Elliot was thinking throughout his entire life. So like I said, this is going to be a very long video. Grab a coffee, grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's get into the story of Elliot Rodger. Okay, so let's get started. Now, an incel. I know a lot of people might not know exactly what an incel is. So just to clarify that, this is what an incel refers to. An incel is a member of the male community who considers themselves to be unable to attract women sexually. Men who are unable to form romantic relationships with women despite desiring one. The word incel is also an acronym for involuntarily celibate, and this term has created hundreds, if not thousands, of online groups where incels gather to spew their hatred towards women for rejecting them and towards men for experiencing these intimate relationships that they are not able to. Elliot Rodger, unfortunately, was one of these incels. Now, before we go into this story, though, I do want you guys to understand that I am not necessarily being sympathetic towards Elliot and what he did. As I went through his manifesto, it's hard not to feel sorry for him as he was growing up. He did experience a lot of bullying. There was a lot of unfortunate incidents that did occur to him. And growing up, I was also bullied quite heavily. Kids can be very mean. And sometimes I don't even think they realize what they did to other kids, especially after they've grown up when they're in their 20s or in their 30s. They don't realize that the things they did to other children where they were younger significantly impact people's lives. So I just want to clear that up, that I am not making an excuse for Elliot. I'm just doing my job here to go into his story so we can get a better understanding of the events and his potential reasoning as to what caused him to do this. So the manifesto actually begins in more of a positive light. It actually does a really good job of making you feel bad for him. And surprisingly, Elliot was a really good writer, and he even makes a comment about it in his manifesto where his mother recognized his talent as a writer, but unfortunately he didn't end up pursuing that the way I think he possibly could have if his manifesto was any sort of hint as to that talent he actually had. But then about halfway through the manifesto, it gets very dark. It takes a significantly dark turn, and you'll see what I mean as we go into the story. So Elliot was born on July 24th, 1991 in London, England, and ended up moving to Los Angeles with his parents when he was just 5 years old. Peter Rodger was his father. He was a Hollywood director and even worked on the Hunger Games movies. His mother was Lee Chin, and she was a nurse, but she was also working in the Hollywood circle, also working on movie sets, and these sort of positions and networks allowed the family to amass a fairly good amount of money and access to all sorts of events. Unfortunately, though, for Elliot, this was one of the things that sparked his hatred towards society because he quickly realized at a young age that there was a hierarchy to life, and this would be a hierarchy that he would never be able to climb. However, it wasn't all bad. According to Elliot himself in his manifesto, and we're not exactly sure how much he remembers about this and how much of this specific part is made up, because I don't know about you, but I don't remember a lot of what happened to me when I was 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 years old. But in his manifesto, he goes on to talk about a time of absolute bliss up until he was 5 years old. It seems that he really enjoyed spending Christmas with his family. He loved spending quality time with his father and traveling with his family. So once they moved to America, he was starting school, and it was a very exciting time for Elliot. According to him, he was quite eager. However, it would be fairly early on in his childhood that he would encounter his first bully. It was a 5-year-old named Joey, and he actually dubbed him as his greatest enemy. But he also made a friend, and ironically, it was a little girl named Maddie who would turn out to be his first and last female friend. And surprisingly, she was part of Elliot's life in and out for basically his entire life. Early into his childhood, it was discovered that Elliot was somewhere on the autistic spectrum when he was only 8 years old. And after that, he would begin to visit many therapists, and he would continue to visit a variety of them up until the end of his life. And on top of having this autism diagnosis, his parents would also go on to get divorced when he was just 7 years old, which this proved to be quite a lot for Elliot. It was a lot for him to process, and he details about the day that his mother told him about the divorce. He said that it was a very sad day for him, knowing that his family had been broken apart. The divorce, though, was also quite eye-opening for him. So you see, just a year after Elliot's father divorced his mother, he had gotten into a new relationship fairly quickly with a woman named Sumaya, and they even started living together. And this progressed fairly quickly, and Elliot was astonished that his father had options available to him in what seemed like an instant moment. This would go on to be something that Elliot would eventually learn to admire and kind of used as a form of motivation, because he figured that if his father could have all of these options, then he should be able to do the same thing. Unfortunately, though, his new stepmother, Sumaya, would not be his favorite person in the world. He would go on to detail many instances where they had these arguments. He said that she was constantly mean to him. There was one instance where she had humiliated him in front of a friend of him, and this basically solidified his hatred towards her. Since Sumaya was not his actual mother, Elliot also felt that she had absolutely no right to tell him what to do. She had no right to impose any sort of rules on him, even though he would spend a lot of time at his father's house that was also technically Sumaya's home. And to add insult to injury when it comes to Elliot's perspective, Sumaya and Elliot's father would go on to have a child named Jazz, who would be Elliot's half-brother, and he would grow up to spark quite a lot of jealousy in Elliot's eyes. So moving on, his parents started recognizing that Elliot was quite shy. He had a really hard time making friends as he was getting a little bit older. He didn't have very much courage to socialize. And now with the stress of doctors and an unstable family household, it literally proved to be way too much for Elliot. And remember, this doesn't excuse what he would go on to do later on. His father would also go on to say that Elliot had some sort of OCD because he noticed that Elliot would always place his plate in the exact same position before eating during any meal. And he would also constantly re-wear the same outfit over and over again when he was much younger. When Elliot turned 9, the first signs of trouble really started manifesting in his life. Unfortunately, Elliot was quite smaller than the rest of his boys his age, and sometimes he was even smaller than a few of the girls in his age as well. This would go on to bother him because he noticed that the taller boys, the more athletic boys, were automatically respected by their peers, and this would turn out to be his first dose of inferiority. And by this point, he had actually still been friends with Maddie and her family because Elliot and her were friends. Her family ended up befriending Elliot's family as well. So both of the families would go over to each other's houses for dinner quite often. Except as Maddie was getting older, she kind of started losing interest in Elliot as a friend, and she really just wanted to play with other girls that were around her age. And so whenever she and her family would go to Elliot's house, she would instead play with Elliot's younger sister, Georgia. And this sparked tremendous jealousy inside of Elliot's mind to the point where he had to leave the room and go cry for several hours. And this would be a pattern that would repeat itself continuously as he got older. Whenever Elliot would feel slighted or he would feel a lot of jealousy, he would basically just run off to hide and cry, and sometimes he would cry for several hours. By the end of the 4th grade, Elliot had made the realization that the cool kids always got what they wanted. They always had friends, they always wore cool clothes, they were popular. These were all things that Elliot was not and also did not have. Although his family did have money, he felt a lot of resentment towards them because he said that they didn't make an effort to dress him in the way that the rest of the popular kids would dress. Around this time as well, he started experiencing a lot of confusion and inadequate feelings about his mixed race. He was half white and half Asian, so he didn't quite fit into either one, and although his mother would regularly try to set up play dates for him, initially they would work, but his social skills were just not catching up. He then noted that middle school was probably his favorite time because this was probably the only time that he got some attention from females. This would be because a lot of girls would at this time greet other friends or other peers, especially a lot of the guys in their classes. They would run up to them and greet them with hugs. Elliot would get hugs from girls at this point, and this was a feeling that completely enraptured him. And once he had gotten a taste of this, he just wanted more and more of it. Sadly, by the time Elliot was in the 9th grade, he was being severely bullied because of how quiet and awkward he was. He would be name called, he would be pushed around, he would be shoved into lockers, humiliated in front of his peers. And there was even a particular incident where he had fallen asleep on his desk, and the bullies at that time decided to essentially just tape his head to his desk. Now, guys, please remember, I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty or bad for Elliot, but some of these bullies are pretty bad out there. So, take a second to just be nice to people. So to take his mind off of the struggles he was experiencing at school, Elliot ended up discovering video games, and one of these video games was World of Warcraft. This would be a game that he would play on and off, mostly on though, throughout his entire life, well into his early 20s, and he basically became obsessed. During the time that he was in the 9th grade, that's when he also noticed that he started to really develop a hatred towards women. And this all stemmed from one particular incident as well. There was a pretty blonde girl in his class who apparently would tease Elliot quite a bit. And Elliot actually had a very huge crush on her, although she had no idea. But this girl would taunt him. She would tease him all the time. It's not exactly known what she said to him, but she basically was a bully towards him. And because of this girl, he said that he started seeing girls as being mean, cruel, and heartless people that took pleasure from his suffering. On his first day of high school, a group of seniors had ended up targeting Elliot because of his small size. Although he was getting older, his size was not getting much bigger. And they ended up teasing him for looking like a 10-year-old and for being physically weak. They would then proceed to throw their food at him in the hall during lunchtime, which obviously would enrage anyone, and it enraged Elliot to the point where he just froze. He had no idea what to do anymore. And it got so bad that whenever his father would drop him off at school, Elliot would basically just start crying in the car, completely bawling his eyes out, begging his father to not make him go because he was basically afraid of what these people would do to him at school. Throughout the rest of the 9th grade, the kids would continue to just bully Elliot for being shy and for being afraid of talking to girls, and they just continued with the name calling. They stole his stuff and they would run off with it. And it actually ended up getting to the point where Elliot had to wait for the hallways to clear because he just didn't want to risk walking down the hallway while it was packed with students and then being pushed into a locker or who knows what else. As he hit puberty though, this is a very challenging time, not just for boys, but for girls as well. He noticed that his desire for females started to grow, but the fact that he was getting constantly rejected ended up making him feel quote unquote starved, almost as if he were basically entitled to this attention or that the female population owed him affection. And unfortunately, this feeling would end up continuing to grow throughout the years. Now, it's not fully known if Elliot ever made any attempts to talk to girls during this time. I don't really know if he ever really made an effort to talk to girls in high school or approach any of them. But from his story, it kind of seemed like he was just a really shy boy, just waiting there for someone to approach him. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily how it works. You kind of have to give some, you kind of have to take some. To make friends, you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And unfortunately, it seemed like Elliot was just a little bit too shy or scared to do that for himself. By the end of the 9th grade, though, Elliot had his parents switch him to a different school because he just didn't like it there. He couldn't take it. But unfortunately, that just did not improve the situation at all. Early into the 10th grade, he was targeted by one of the popular boys at this new school who would shove him into lockers while the pretty girls, including the guy's girlfriend, would just stare and laugh at this entire ordeal. This sparked some sort of revolutionary thought, according to Elliot in his mind, that the pretty girls essentially liked the mean guys and that the mean guys were the ones that succeeded in life. Not only did this enrage Elliot, but it also solidified his hatred again towards men and women who were deemed to be popular and beautiful because they were essentially everything that he was not. And this kind of also convinced them of that saying that nice guys really do finish last. During the sophomore year in high school, he also ended up having a panic attack in the middle of school. And it had gotten so bad on that particular day that he just froze. He could not move. A teacher literally had to go and help him out of the hallway, and she had to call his mother in order to come get him. After his mom arrived to the school, Elliot was said to have refused to go back to that school and basically had to be switched to a brand new school that only had 100 students in order to help him with his social anxiety. And I could go on and on and on. There are so many more experiences that Elliot details. It was a very long manifesto, but there were many instances where Elliot felt like he had been wronged that resulted from people bullying him. And he was also feeling quite a lot of feelings about anger and despair just watching happy couples having fun or just watching other guys have girlfriends. And when you think about it, this is kind of terrifying because if you think about it, this must have meant that he truly lost control over his emotions and that he just couldn't process things properly like the rest of us could. Seeing a happy couple or seeing a guy with his girlfriend anywhere should not trigger these intense feelings of absolute rage and destruction within you. And it kind of makes me really worry that he just had absolutely no way of regulating his emotions. Okay, so as he's getting older, he's going through high school, his parents are getting really worried about how extremely introverted Elliot is. While most boys his age are playing sports, they're dating their first girlfriends, they're going to parties, they're having a lot of friends, Elliot didn't do any of that. Instead, all he would really do was play his video game. Then when he was 18, Elliot ended up discovering the lottery, and this was some sort of revolutionary, life-changing idea according to him. And after he saw a sign about the lottery, he went on to ask his mother to explain it to him. I guess he didn't know how it worked. And so when she did, it was like a light bulb went off in his head. He felt like if he were to win the lottery and become a multimillionaire, he would be able to have everything he wanted. And then therefore that would eventually lead to a girlfriend. And at one point he ended up driving all the way to Arizona because the tickets there had bigger money prizes. But as you can imagine, this just did not work out for Elliot. Now, as he was older, Elliot also ended up creating a YouTube channel and a blog where he detailed a lot of the painful moments in his life, including constantly being rejected by women he found attractive and men who didn't want to be his friend. And there was even a time where he wrote down that he was no longer taking his prescribed medications because he believed that it was wrong for him. So there's no telling whether or not him taking his medication would have really prevented the horrible things that ended up happening from happening. So time goes on and Elliot just became more and more aggressive, especially towards strangers and people online. Although to his parents, he remained this quiet, shy boy that they've always known, they really described him as being a super well-mannered small child. To everyone else, he was quite literally the opposite. Unfortunately, though, his parents didn't really know how else to help him. He was going to therapists. They were trying their best to get him socialized. Even Sumaya, his stepmother, would set up play dates for him, but it wasn't working. So his parents figured that he should go off to college in a different city in order to help him better integrate into society. And they figured that since they were living in LA, a really close, good opportunity for him would be to go to Santa Barbara. There were a few community colleges there, as well as the University of California at Santa Barbara. Which, I mean, is not a bad idea if you think about it. It's a beautiful location. It's next to the ocean. The sun shines all year round. It's surrounded by nature. So there's really quite a lot to love here. When his parents ran this idea by Elliot, his initial thoughts were actually quite optimistic. He was excited about this. He did dream of having a new girlfriend at this school. It was a new location where no one actually knew him. No one knew about his past. So he figured it would be very much like having a fresh start. However, all he ended up encountering were more of the kinds of couples that he envied and despised. He would constantly feel like it should have been him, like he was owed the same experience of being with a pretty girl. And he went on to detail that he just did not understand why the universe was denying him the same experience that everyone else just got to experience so easily. And to be honest here, if you look at photos of Elliot, he was a conventionally attractive person, which goes to show you that personality really does play a huge role in developing any sort of relationship. When it comes down to it, no one owes you anything, regardless of how good looking you are or regardless of how much you think you deserve it. So Elliot enrolls at a community college and he starts attending classes. But unfortunately, he was quickly discouraged about the prospect of finding a girlfriend because although he did make multiple attempts at improving his appearance, he would dress better, he would buy nicer clothing, he would groom himself a little bit better, and he even developed a way of speaking in a more eloquent manner. But unfortunately, none of this ended up working because no girls ended up approaching him. Although, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure how these girls were supposed to know that they were expected to approach him. I know when I was taking my classes at university, my initial thoughts were not necessarily to approach all of the guys in my class. I kind of was focused on other things, especially what was being taught in that particular class. So I can't really understand how he could put this blame on women for not approaching him. So as he would go to these classes, he would spot beautiful girls. And of course, he was in California. He was in a really cool city that's known for having a lot of beautiful people. But unfortunately, these girls would not talk to him. And when they wouldn't talk to him, Elliot could not take it. He just could not process this information correctly. And this would then lead him to completely dropping the class, which was, I guess, a bit of an overreaction. And this pattern ended up continuing several more times. Anytime he would start a new class, he would spot a beautiful girl that he had his eye on. And after she didn't talk to him after a few classes, he would end up dropping the class because he just could not tolerate it. In posts, though, that we would later discover, Elliot had detailed that when he first moved to Santa Barbara, that was when he first really started thinking about carrying an act of violence out as a form of revenge. This, to him, would have been the final solution to dealing with all of the injustices that he had to face at the hands of women and society. And to make himself feel better, he would spend hours visiting websites that focused on hating women, and he would regularly leave hateful comments, such as this one where he states, quote, "Start envisioning a world where women fear you." And surprisingly, he shared this information with his father. He would show him the websites he was visiting, I guess as an attempt at bonding with him or to reach out for help, I guess. And throughout these strange forums, he would leave further comments that urged other incels to fight back and that one day they would all overthrow this oppressive feminist system. As you can imagine, as a father, he was quite upset and shocked about what Elliot was doing. According to interviews he gave after the attack, his father said that he went on to quickly shut down these websites and to tell Elliot to not look at them and that this was wrong, that he shouldn't be looking at these sorts of websites. But unfortunately, it did little to change Elliot's mind. After that, Elliot became weirdly obsessed with losing his V card, and he even told his father about this again. And being a parent, his father told him what any parent would do, and he told him that there was absolutely no rush, that he shouldn't be ashamed about this, and that it would happen at the right time. And although his father did recognize that his son was having a lot of social problems, never did he believe that it would turn into what it did. So as a way to vent his frustrations and to communicate with other like-minded thinkers, Elliot was keeping up with his YouTube channel where he would post ridiculous videos where he would bash against women. He just simply didn't understand why women didn't find him attractive, and he even referred to himself as the supreme gentleman as he went on to explain why women owed him and that they were stupid for not recognizing him. And here's a short clip of one of those videos.
Hey, Elliot Rodger here. Right now I'm just taking a walk through the park. I'm just contemplating about my life and how unfair it's been lately. Hell, it's been unfair for the last 8 years. Ever since I hit puberty. Ever since I started desiring girls. But they never desired me back. Life has been a living hell since then.
So at one point in Santa Barbara, Elliot ended up meeting a man named Chance who happened to be African American. He was friends with Elliot's original roommates when he first moved to Santa Barbara. And during a conversation when everyone was at the apartment, the topic of dating came up. And Chance ended up telling the story about how he had lost his V card when he was only 13 years old to a Caucasian blonde girl. This, of course, was Elliot's fantasy. This is all he wanted, right? But when he heard this, it was said to have infuriated him and prompted his racism to show quite loudly. In his manifesto, he detailed that he just could not understand how an inferior, ugly black boy would be able to get a white girl and not him. But that's not it, guys. He goes on and then he says, they, as in Caucasian blonde girls, would give themselves to this filthy scum but reject him. Shocking. So obviously this led to an argument with all of the men in the apartment. Elliot was not shy about voicing his criticism and his opinion about this sort of behavior, I guess, from Chance's side, and this prompted his roommates to move out pretty quickly after that argument. But soon enough, 2 new roommates ended up moving in. Throughout his notes in his journaling, Elliot documented how he had a huge fascination and obsession with blonde white women. And it seems that this was his type, but no matter how much he adored them, he was simply afraid of approaching them. On one particular occasion, he was driving down the road where he spotted two attractive blonde women waiting at a bus stop. So he notices them and he decides that he's going to make an attempt. So he slows down, stops in front of the bus stop. He smiles at them. However, the girls just ended up ignoring him. And obviously this threw him into some sort of rage. So he speeds off, but then decides to make a sharp U-turn, goes back, and then throws his hot latte on both of the girls and watched with joy as it stained their jeans before he ended up speeding off one more time. In another incident that was documented on his YouTube videos, he was recording himself at a park during a sunset when a couple ended up sitting at a bench in front of him. Again, this drove Elliot absolutely bananas, and he was initially pointing the camera at himself, but then he turns the camera and points it at this couple and talks about how they purposely chose to sit in front of him to make him jealous on purpose, which is completely insane. He quite literally thought that the people of the world were conspiring against him and only him.
I'm so angry right now. I was enjoying a peaceful time at this beach park, and what comes to sit in front of me? A young couple, a guy with his hot girlfriend. I mean, who do they think they are? Coming here, sitting in front of me to make me feel jealous?
He quite literally believed that complete strangers were taking time out of their day to go out, find him, and make him jealous. Things just got harder for Elliot at this point. Whenever he would see any sort of happy couple, he would just completely lose it inside of his mind. All he could think about was how to hurt these people for displaying any sort of affection in front of him. And he noted that he had never been a violent person by nature, but after building up so much hatred over the years, he realized that he would no longer hesitate to harm his enemies if he was given the opportunity. Then in the summer of 2013, things got worse at a college party. He had written on that one day that he decided to give women one last chance to help him lose his V card, which is a very weird sort of entitlement. I don't even know how he could justify that. But his goal was to make sure that he lost his V card by the time he was 22. He had spent 2 weeks vigorously working out, according to him, in one final attempt at appearing attractive. He then wanted to go out and then try one more time to get the attention that he so deeply desired. But his social skills were so underdeveloped at this point that he actually had to take a few shots of vodka before going out for some liquid courage. So he leaves his house with this newfound courage and he goes for a walk and tries to talk to several people along the way. Some people kind of just ignored him. Some people talked to him, but he just became so incoherent and drunk from all of the shots he had taken that he ended up stumbling into a random house party. So he goes in and initially he tries to blend in. He goes toward a table that had some beers and he ends up drinking one. But then he saw something that completely enraged him and set him off. There was an Asian kid that was talking to a blonde white girl, and Elliot could not comprehend this. He goes on to say, "How could an ugly Asian attract the attention of a white girl, while a beautiful Eurasian like myself has never had any attention from them?" So furious at this point, he leaves the area and goes outside towards a wooden ledge where he sat by himself. A group of guys ended up coming around to where he was and they were all socializing with each other. And then after the guys came, a group of girls followed. Except at this point, none of them were paying attention to him. They were all just kind of socializing with each other around him. He said that he made a few attempts at talking to some of the girls that were there next to him, but they all ended up ignoring him. So in retaliation, he ends up standing up and started calling all of them names and saying a bunch of ridiculous things. And then he did something unthinkable. He then literally tries to push off several of the girls off of this wooden ledge that was about 10 feet off the ground. Thankfully, though, the guys that were there ended up stopping him, but instead they ended up pushing Elliot off of the ledge, which ended up injuring him quite significantly. He had shattered his leg. And if everything I have said so far in this video doesn't make you think that Elliot had some sort of illogical sense of entitlement as he got older, this part will. So as he was stumbling home from his apartment, He became increasingly upset that no one was helping him. And although I agree that if you see someone injured or hurt, the nice thing to do would be to see if this person is okay and maybe call for help. But Elliot expected people to do something more. He expected women to go above and beyond for him. He said that a woman should have helped him more and should have actually taken care of him, offered him to take him home, and then offered to sleep with him in order to make him feel better. So because Elliot's injuries were actually pretty bad, he did have to tell his parents. And when he told his father, he ended up changing the story around and said that he had been a victim of bullying. So when police went to the house where the party had taken place, they interviewed the people there, and they all obviously gave the opposite version of what Elliot had said. But because there was no actual proof of what had happened, the case ended up being dropped. And like I said, this altercation had left Elliot pretty badly injured, and he had to get surgery on his leg, which ended up postponing his ultimate plan. However, in the end, he ended up seeing this as being a positive thing because it just gave him a little bit more time to think and really plan through what he wanted to do. So with enough time to think as he recovered, when it finally came time to put his plan into action, Elliot went on to buy 3 hand weapons, with one of them being a backup in case any of the other 2 were to malfunction. He even ended up going to firing ranges to practice and documented the entire experience in his journal. And at the first time he used one of these weapons, he said that it made him feel so sick and uncomfortable, but sadly he knew that it just had to be this way. After years and years of what he called torture, he concluded that women were mentally flawed and incapable of making rational decisions since they always choose to mate with barbaric, wild, beast-like men. He then went on to call himself a god for being intelligent enough to see the truth, and that his purpose was to exact the ultimate retribution on all the impurities he sees in the world. So he had spent quite a lot of time in an area of Isla Vista, which is part of Santa Barbara. And throughout here, he would spend quite a lot of time thinking about why women wouldn't ever give him a chance. How they could just be walking around the beaches and the parks in their shorts and bikini tops. He quite literally believed that women were doing this to taunt him on purpose. And he actually expressed these concerns or thoughts to his therapist at the time. And his therapist kind of sympathized with him. He told him that although it was true that girls in this area of Isla Vista did prefer more of the muscular jockey type of guys, that it shouldn't discourage Elliot from eventually having a girlfriend, and that it would eventually happen to him at the right time. However, Elliot didn't hear any of the positive side of that. He kind of just used it as a form of reinforcement to think that women just really liked the mean guys. It finally got to the point where Elliot declared that the only thing he had to live for at this point was revenge, and that he wanted to punish women for committing the crime of rejecting a magnificent gentleman as himself. He also wanted to punish the popular men and boys for enjoying their heavenly lives and having sex with all the girls while he had to suffer alone. But guys, that is not it. There's a lot more here. So in the epilogue of his manifesto, he details how he would build the perfect world, and it's very graphic. And there are things in there that are actually very deeply disturbing. So I'll give you guys kind of like a summary on it. And if you guys do want to read his manifesto, it is available online. Just Google Elliot Rodger manifesto and it'll pop up for you guys. So in his epilogue, he discusses how he would abolish sex so the world would be pure. But to do that, he would need to quarantine women in concentration camps. Obviously, in this make-believe world, Elliot claimed himself to be the ruler and gave himself the greatest power, which allowed him to starve women in these concentration camps, which would eventually give him the ultimate satisfaction in causing them great pain and suffering, just as they had done to him. So basically, what he was saying is that if he couldn't have it, no one would. And so with that, Elliot went on to determine that the attack would need to take place in Isla Vista because that's where he had seen the most amount of beautiful people. Surprisingly, he had actually planned to do this on Halloween 2013, But during the phase where he was doing research about where to plan this attack, he had chosen to look at some YouTube videos about Halloween in the area, and he noticed that there were actually quite a lot of cops in the area, so he figured that it just wouldn't be possible. He would be stopped way too quickly. So then he postpones it to April of 2014. He ended up coming down with a pretty bad cold, which forced him to postpone the attack once again. And this time he chose a third and final date of May 23rd, 2014. Now, for his plan, he had planned it out in three distinct phases. So phase 1 would represent his vengeance against all the men who have had pleasurable lives while he's had to suffer. He basically wanted to even out the score here. He would do this by silently luring as many people as possible to his apartment, which he would use and turn into his own personal torture chamber. And if you read his manifesto, it's very graphic. He goes on to detail about all the sorts of torturous things he would do to these people. And it's actually way too graphic for me to put here on YouTube. But again, it is available if you guys want to read it. Phase 2 would represent the war on women. He wanted to punish women for depriving him of sex his entire life. He recognized that he couldn't take the lives of all the women, but he did want to at least deliver a devastating blow. His plan here was to attack the women that represented everything he hated about women. And to him, this meant that he wanted to attack a sorority that had the most attractive women. And in the area of Isla Vista and Santa Barbara, this happened to be a sorority called Alpha Phi at UCSB. So he goes on to stalk these girls at their sorority house. He even spent some time picking which ones he wanted to pinpoint. And he just spent a lot of time thinking about the satisfaction he would get by getting his revenge on these girls. In phase 3, he named this one the Ultimate Showdown on the streets of Isla Vista. His plan would essentially be to drive to his father's house in the morning, take the life of his stepbrother Jazz, and also of his stepmother Sumaya, but not his father because his father would also be on a business trip at that point. But he also said that he just could not bring himself to take the life of his own father. And finally, towards the end of his manifesto, he finishes off with the following. I am not part of the human race. Humanity has rejected me. The females of the human species have never wanted to mate with me, so how could I possibly consider myself part of humanity? Humanity has never accepted me among them, and now I know why. I am more human than them. I am superior to all of them. I am Elliot Rodger, magnificent, glorious, supreme, eminent, divine. I am the closest thing there is to a living God. Humanity is a disgusting, depraved, and evil species. It is my purpose to punish them all. I will purify the world of everything that is wrong with it. On the day of retribution, I will truly be a powerful God, punishing everyone I deem to be impure and depraved. In April of 2014, a month before his day of retribution was set to happen, Elliot hadn't spoken to his mother for several days, which made her incredibly worried. She decided to do some snooping on her son and ended up discovering his YouTube channel, which she had found his very disturbing videos on there. And this really worried her. She wanted to make sure that her son was actually okay. So she ends up calling the police for them to do a welfare check on him. So the police show up at Elliot's apartment and he answers the door and he talks to them, and he was able to convince them that everything was completely fine and that he had simply just had a disagreement with his parents. After that visit, he would then go on to remove the videos from his YouTube channel, and then he made a post about it saying that he had been kind of caught and that he would just take them down and repost them at a later date. And unfortunately, this part was actually really hard for me to read because the police were so close from actually preventing this massacre that ended up happening. If the police had just, gone into his apartment and gone into his bedroom, they would have quite literally discovered his entire arsenal of weaponry and all of his writings detailing his exact plan. Unfortunately, they were quite close to doing that, but it just ended up being a missed opportunity. So on May 23rd, 2014, Elliot began his rampage, and true to his manifesto, he began by luring people into his apartment, and the easiest targets ended up being his roommates. He proceeded to stab two of his roommates, George Chen and James Hong, followed by a friend of theirs named David Wang in his apartment. We would later find out that each of the three men had been lured in at separate times and alone, which is why Elliot was able to take them down. Following the stabbings, Elliot then drove to a local coffee shop and bought some coffee around 8:30 p.m. He was seen by witnesses in his car at his apartment parking lot using a laptop where he uploaded his famous retribution video to YouTube at 9:17 p.m. The next minute at 9:18 p.m., he sent out a mass email with his manifesto to his family, former friends, acquaintances, even to his therapist, and he named it My Twisted World. It ended up being 141 pages long. It was very long, and it explained his entire reasoning for doing this. Meanwhile, his therapist receives the email. He's going through the manifesto, and obviously they are completely shocked about what they are reading. So they call Elliot's mother, and she goes to look at Elliot's YouTube channel, and that's where she finds the retribution video that he had just posted a few minutes earlier. She then calls Elliot's father, and both of them start driving towards Isla Vista right away, and also calling the police. After Elliot left his apartment parking lot, he ended up driving towards the Alpha Phi sorority, where he would go on to shoot two women, Catherine Cooper and Veronica Weiss, who sadly did pass away in the attacks. He then gets back into his car and this time drives to another coffee shop at Pardal Road, where he ends up killing a man named Christopher Ross Michaels Martinez. But Elliot wasn't done just yet. He then gets back into his car and starts driving down the wrong side of the road, hitting pedestrian after pedestrian that were walking on the sidewalk. He also managed to shoot a few of them, but thankfully all of these people would survive. Now at this point, the police are chasing Elliot and they are exchanging gunfire. And throughout this madness, Elliot unfortunately was able to injure a total of 14 people and did take the lives of 7. Shortly after 9:30 p.m., Elliot ended up crashing his car at an intersection, and at 9:35 p.m., police found his body inside of his car, and he had passed away due to a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This was a promise that he had actually made to himself in his manifesto. He said that he didn't want to die, but unfortunately, he said he knew he had to. So as police approach his car, they end up searching, and they discovered that Elliot had truly been ready for a war. Inside of his car, they found many more weapons, including 548 rounds of unused ammunition. Although many more people could have been hurt and had their lives taken, there were a few of Elliot's family members that were extremely thankful to have actually been spared. If you remember in his manifesto, Elliot claimed that he also wanted to get rid of his stepbrother Jazz and his stepmother Sumaya. His reasoning for wanting to get rid of his stepmother was because she was just awful to him. He did not like her. They didn't get along. And also because she would basically be in the way of him getting rid of his younger stepbrother Jazz. Jazz was actually becoming a successful actor at a very young age. He was quite good looking, as you can see by this photo. And to Elliot, Jazz was everything that he was not, and he basically just could not handle it. And the only reason Sumaya and Jazz were spared was because Elliot's father ended up returning early from his business trip. And that is the story of Elliot Rodgers. His long and dangerous manifesto has unfortunately gone on to inspire many more like-minded men across the world to hate women and men for the exact same reasons, including a man called Alec Minassian. Now, this took place in 2018 in Toronto, and I was living there at the time, so I definitely got kind of like a front row view of this entire thing as it unfolded. It was a spring day in 2018, and people were commuting to work. They were going to school. The particular street where this took place was quite busy. A lot of people used this just to get from one place to another, and no one was expecting for this to occur. So in the afternoon of April 23rd, 2018, Alec had rented a van and ended up driving down this very busy sidewalk on Yonge Street. He ended up taking the lives of 8 women and 2 men, all in the name of Elliot Rodger. He even tweeted about it, praising Elliot for being his inspiration. And then a few years later, actually just in 2022, Alec would be found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison, which is completely insane to me to think that one guy who just had this insane amount of entitlement could inspire people all over the world to commit these sorts of heinous acts. But let me know what you guys think. Is this possibly the motive behind the charges against Brian Kohberger? Let me know what you guys think. We still have a lot left to learn about this case in Idaho. I am very curious to see what we end up finding out in the future once the trial does start later this summer. But in the meantime, let me know what you guys think. And thank you so much for joining me. I will see you guys in the next video.